Rangers forward Artemi Panarin is on the trade block. The Panthers tried going after him in 2019. Could the Panthers finally get him in 2026?
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Thursday, January 29th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the nation's #1 sports podcasting network, and it is your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, the host of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. You can follow me on X at MondoMan12, and join me on today's edition for the first two segments here on the show. He is from the Hockey News and also from the Hockey Show on the Dan Lepetard and Friends Network, and part of DraftKings as well, David Dwork. David, welcome back to the show, and a jam-packed one that we have today. So glad to have you here.
Good to be back, Mondo.
Absolutely. And today we are going to discuss the fact that the soft trade deadline, which is the one prior to the Olympic break, it's not an official one, but with the roster freeze that is going to go into effect next week, now trades are starting to brew for these teams, as we saw with the Islanders making 2, and now with Artemi Panarin being a scratch for roster-related purposes. Begs the question, do the Panthers have enough to trade for Artemi Panarin? So I remember, let's flash back to 2019, David, when the Panthers were trying to be big spenders in free agency. In that trade deadline, Dale Talon shipped out Jared McCann and Nick Bjugstad because they had term left on their deals in order to open up that roster space to at least get a goalie, as Roberto Luongo was dealing with the hip injuries from there, and then end up getting Sergei Bobrovsky. Him and Artemi Panarin were going to places together, and then there was a report of Colorado offering a short-term deal, the New York Islanders possibly, but at the end of the day, he ended up going to New York. But then there was the letter before Artemi Panarin signed from the previous management in New York, and then there's a letter 2.0 this time around. But to get a guy like Artemi Panarin would be great, as a guy who consistently scores 30 goals, brings so much excitement, who can deke around, has a rocket of a shot from the left side, similar to Steven Stamkos, especially on the power play. It would be great for the Florida Panthers to have him here.
No, he'll be a great add wherever he goes. I mean, obviously he's a prolific scorer, and that's why teams are going to be, lining up to try to acquire him. Will he be a good fit with the Panthers? I mean, you would think, just because a guy plays a certain style, like we've seen guys come to Florida, shift their game around, fit to Paul Maurice's systems. Artemi Panarin's a pro. He's been around for a long time, and I'm sure he's well aware of the way that the Panthers play, having played against them several times over the last few years since Paul Maurice has been around. I would never put anything past Bill Zito in terms of, can he make it happen? Now, I'm not saying he's going to. I'm not saying that they're actively trying to. I'm sure that they're exploring all options, because that's what the Panthers front office has done. They are very meticulous about everything that they do. I'm curious to see kind of how it plays out, just in terms of financial fit, where he's going to go, what it's going to take to pry him away from New York. But yeah, to answer your first question, just in terms of a fit, I think if he decided that Florida was where he wanted to go, as the no movement clause, he kind of has a lot of control right now, that he would have an understanding as a professional hockey player for a long time. He's a smart hockey guy. He knows that coming to Florida, there's going to be a certain level of play and style of play that would be expected of him. Now, whether or not, if he's not willing to do that, it would make zero sense for him to want to come to Florida and continue his career. No sense. He knows what he'd be getting himself into. So if that were to come to fruition, if all that were to come together, then I wouldn't be as concerned that, he's going to come to Florida and be a defensive liability or anything like that. Like, he's shown that he can play defense in his career. He's got speed. He's got a good stick. He's got a high hockey IQ. So it's just going to be a matter of, where is it going to fit in terms of the price that the Rangers want to pay, and a team that's going to be able to afford to keep him, not just in the short term, but I would imagine in the long term as well, because wherever he goes, odds are they're going to want to sign him to an extension. Whether that happens or not, we'll see, because I'm sure, if he goes somewhere as a rental and then goes into the offseason as a UFA like he did back in 2019, That might be Florida's better avenue to
Mm-hmm.
acquiring him than trading for him at this deadline. If they're looking long term, if they see Panarin as a guy that they'd like to have long term, I think it might behoove them to try to wait till the offseason. But that, again, that's a risk. But it just kind of seems to make a little bit more sense to me.
Yeah, right now the Panthers have $2.5 million in cap space, and they took away the broker rule as far as a third party to pull off a trade. So it's not like the Panthers could even try to fit him at 25% under their books. And also the fact that some of the injured players for the Panthers are already starting to skate. So do the Panthers want to go in the direction of season-ending LTIRing Alexander Barkov in order to open that additional $6.2 million in order to get him? But then you'd have to have the New York Rangers retain the 50%, and that their ask is similar to what the Islanders wanted for Brock Nelson, which was a first-round pick, a prospect, and then a third-round pick. That's what the return was for the Islanders there. So I just, the fact that the Panthers don't have one until the 2028 offseason, and the fact that the Rangers, are trying to rebuild, or as they say, retool, they want to get an immediate pick back. But who knows where the Panthers would be if they actually pulled that off. But you're also not raising your ceiling for this specific season if you're season-ending LTIRing Alexander Barkov. So in my opinion, when I see it, it kind of would feel like a short-sighted move.
Yeah, if that's the way that they were going to go to free up space would be Barkov's money, then yeah, it's you're trying to make up for one over the other when it's, again, as you said, you don't know what the future is going to bring. Now, I think that if Florida did pull the trigger and bring Panarin down here and did whatever, or gave up whatever assets it would take to make that happen in the next, month or so, that there'd be a long-term plan there. This isn't the kind of team in the position that they're in right now to be making short-term swings.
Mm-hmm.
This is a big picture type team. They're going to be contending for a long time. So that's why I would kind of take their view of this situation as, okay, we've seen Bill Zito over the years take big swings. We've seen him pull off moves people didn't necessarily see coming or think that he could pull off. So I wouldn't put anything past them. But just because a big flashy name becomes available, it's like, oh, what, the Panthers should be in on this guy. It's another Seth Jones, it's another Claude Giroux, or, all the guys that they brought in over the past few years. But let's just, if it happens, it happens. I don't think it's going to happen just because there's too many moving parts. And it's just the way that the season is done right now. We don't know exactly how Florida is going to be maneuvering the next 6 to 8 weeks in terms of their injured players. I'm a very curious fan in terms of watching it play out and wherever he ends up. But for the Panthers' sake, if it doesn't end up being Florida, head out west somewhere, maybe San Jose or something. That'd be a cool spot.
That'd be awesome to have him on the wing with Macklin Celebrini, and other teams who are interested are the Colorado Avalanche, the Dallas Stars. But and I would not, and of teams that out in the East, I would not be surprised if Detroit finally pulls the trigger and gives away some assets to finally at least take the next step in the Yzer plan there. So that's one Eastern Conference team that I'm very curious when it comes to that. But also for Dallas, they can open up $9 million in cap because of the fact that Tyler Seguin's injury happened during the season as opposed to Alexander Barkov's for the Panthers. So chances are Jim Nill can actually put that as far as season-ending LTIR and still have Artemi Panarin as a rental, and still have at least kind of some room if they let him walk in free agency to still kind of try to sign Jason Robertson to a deal, because I mean him and Cole Caulfield are up there in American scoring, and the price is only for Jason Robertson at least is going to go up a little higher as he's an RFA this year.
Yeah, Dallas is a fun team to watch. They always seem to put together something special, and then come playoff time, it doesn't quite work out. But no, I mean, that'd be an interesting situation to see if Panarin could go down there and join Robertson and Johnson and Hintz and Rantanen and all the skill that they have in Dallas. That could make for a fun postseason.
Yeah, and they would have the room to do it, and they would have the assets to do so as well, more than the Florida Panthers do. And again, I just think it's a little bit unrealistic for the Panthers to try to get it. If it's in the offseason, even better, and that would also require a little bit of roster purging for the Panthers here. Regardless, in order to fit him in, is if we're thinking that he's going to command somewhere around 8 to 10 million around there for the Panthers, but thankfully some contracts are coming off the books as far as Mackie Samoskevich, who would need to get a little bit of a payday, and Sergei Bobrovsky, but he won't be commanding a high salary. But we're actually going to transition to segment number 2, where we're going to discuss how the Panthers can navigate bringing back even their injured players, because that is going to probably be their trade deadline moves as opposed to adding from outside of the organization. We're going to do that all next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. And if you've ever hired someone who looked great on paper but wasn't a right fit, you know how important it is when you have candidates who truly match what you're looking for. Trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. If I needed to hire someone for the show, I go straight to Indeed and be very specific about what I need. Real experience, not just resume buzzwords. Sponsored jobs boost your posts to the people who are a best match for your role, and that makes a real difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. Spend time interviewing candidates who check all the boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of the show get a $75 sponsored job credit to give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support the show by saying you've heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. And I'd like to thank you guys once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. And if you haven't already, make sure to check out our Everyday Club. It's an access to an ad-free audio feed for the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. It's an invite to the members-only Everyday Club Discord server, which includes group chats for listeners of the show. Tap the link in the show notes to learn more. So right back here with David Dwork here, who's spending the first 2 segments here with us here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. And it again, I've repeated this a few times here on my show, but this season feels like similarly to kind of 2023 for the Panthers here, as they are hoping to get the injured players back as far as their specific deadline moves. But it's not going to be easy for the Panthers to even bring them back, because even before this season started, David, we were seeing that the Panthers were over the cap, and this was before the Alexander Barkov injury, knowing that Matthew Tkachuk was going to be returning around the December-January range, so they could afford to spend over. But with the new rules of only getting $3.8 million in relief as opposed to full cap hit, and of course with the playoff cap, this makes things a little bit more difficult for the Panthers here. But also it makes the nerdy side come out of me as far as like putting the math together on how the Panthers could put this roster back together.
Yeah, it's going to be some mathematical gymnastics by the Panthers that certainly skills that are above my pay grade in terms of putting the numbers together. Just kind of looking at how it's going to have to play out, because like right now, just looking over at Puckpedia, they've got about $2.5 million in cap space. As you said, they're going to have to make room, around 7, I guess it would be 7.5. If you're talking about both Barkov and Seth Jones on a playoff roster, they've got the new rules this year that you just have to be under the cap for the 20 man active roster that you suit up for a playoff game. So there's obviously going to be, I don't want to say obviously because we've never seen it before, but I'm thinking that there's going to be some interesting moves made, not just with the Panthers, but just league wide generally, as teams try to get under their cap. For a team like the Panthers, and again, I'm just kind of spitballing off the top of my head here, but I mean, let's say everybody's healthy and they've got a problem just in terms of suiting up a certain roster. Well, Danil Tarasov's been playing out of his mind. If he gets hot, if he's a guy you want to go with in the playoffs, all of a sudden Sergei Bobrovsky's a healthy scratch and you've got 10 million in cap space right there to fit everybody. Like that's kind of the nuclear option I get. Well, it depends, right? Because Bob has won you back-to-back Stanley Cups. So, and again, that's just one option, but guys get hurt, things happen. It's going to be a very fluid situation. So trying to, put pins or, put pegs in the holes right now and figure out this is where this guy's going to go, this is where that guy's going to go. It's really, almost an act of futility, just as you don't know how things are going to play out. But what we do know is that there's going to have to be some gymnastics that are going to done with the numbers, just because that it's going to have to be done with the numbers, just because looking at it right now, they need to make room. If everybody's going to be healthy, which is, I think, the plan, the injured guys are all on the ice right now. We've seen Nosek, Barkov, Gadovich, Kulikov. They're all skating. They're all working their way back, which is great for the Panthers. They're just going to have to make the money work. And at the end of the day, Armando, it's kind of the old addict from the Miami Heat and Pat Riley. It's now moved to the Panthers. In Zito, we trust. In Pat, we trust. In Zito, we trust. So I'm going to go ahead and just throw out the assumption. I know what that means to me, but I'm going to throw out the assumption that I think the Panthers GM and his staff, they've got plan A, B, C, D. They've got it all worked out, what the different avenues they could run. So whatever Florida does, I'm confident that they're going to have the situation handled. I just am anxious to see how it plays out, just because it's unprecedented, right? We've never seen anything like this.
No doubt. And it's funny because Pat Riley is in on a superstar right now for that might be playing in Milwaukee. So
go get Giannis.
Go get your man. But it's funny because for Gadjevich, so guys like Gadjevich and Kulikov, those are the guys that I would be, as far as the guys who skated recently for the Panthers, as far as the injured players, I would expect those guys to be returning first for the Panthers. As far as Nosek and Barkov, it's still no indication about when Nosek suffered the injury. That's a little bit of how tight-lipped they were. So we actually didn't know until the day of media day. A lot of us, at least I didn't. But I was thinking that when the Panthers do. And this is the assumption that everybody is healthy. There's a few moves that you can make because, for the example, Jonah Gadjevich is not on LTIR, so you would just have to open up the roster spot. So that could be in the case of sending Sandis Vilmanis or Mackie Semiskevich down, or in the case of some fourth line players waiving or trading a guy. In the case of Luke Kunin, who's been in and out of the lineup as well. But then when Seth Jones comes back, because he is on LTIR, that is where the numbers are a little bit more difficult, and that you'll have to be short a roster player of the 23. So it would be open up the space for a defenseman there, which is either waiving Zabrango or Tobias Bjornfoot in that. But Tobias Bjornfoot has played wonderfully since coming back. So that would still leave the Panthers over the cap there. So in the case of that, there's one player that's also been out of favor as far as a forward who played a lot of penalty kill minutes, had a career high in goals last year, who actually got an extension, Jesper Boquist, which he's been out of the lineup. And it kind of reminds me of when Frank Vetrano was out of the lineup for the Panthers just a few years ago. Thankfully he ended with a bang with that 2-goal performance in San Jose right before getting traded to New York. So I think that might be, in the case of for the Panthers there, the avenue that they'll go to clear that. So I think that's the easiest one as far as a player who's just not consistently in the lineup as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's going to be options. Boquist's AAV is $1.5 million. So even if you do get him off your books, it's still not a huge number that you're still going to have some more work to do. I know when people just kind of look at the Panthers salary cap and look at everybody's numbers, they're like, oh, well, Evan Rodriguez is a popular number because he's got a $3 million cap hit. And because I guess he's not like the flashy guy, but he does so many different things right for the Panthers. And there's so many players on this roster that play crucial roles that maybe you don't realize just because they're not putting up big offensive numbers, but they're being critical on the penalty kill. The depth the Panthers have. You and I have talked about it a lot, Armando, just how vital their depth is and how it makes them such a lethal team. So again, that's kind of the luxury of building a team that they have, is now that they have this problem to deal with where you have too many players. But look, at the end of the day, like, it's the Panthers are getting healthy. Mm-hmm. They're making their run now. Like, this is the time where they need to turn the corner. It's beginning of February. We're about to hit the Olympic break. We're getting towards the trade deadline. This is when you need to get your legs moving and hit the ground running for the second half of the season. The Panthers are doing that. Mm-hmm. They're learning how to win on the road. They're doing really well there. They're going to have not that many home games the second half of the season just because of the way the schedule is. So the fact that they figured out their road play and they're getting really comfortable there, I think that's going to be a big key to their successful second half of the season if it does go that way. But look, I think when the playoffs start, there's a good chance that there might be a guy or two that's on the roster right now that aren't going to be there later. The second, the lower half of the roster, maybe 3 or 4 guys, depending on what kind of moves they have to make with AHL Charlotte. So it's all going to be very fluid, Armando. I'm certainly excited to see how it plays out. But I mean, just look at the 2 conversations that we've had. We've just right now we're talking about just trying to fit the guys on the roster who were hurt back in under the salary cap. And before that, we're talking about bringing in a guy like Artemi Panarin and on top of all that. So this is life as a Panther fan right now. This is what you guys get.
Good problems.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my point. Like, these are all great problems to have. Oh, and by the way, shine those Stanley Cup rings, guys. You've got 2 of them from back-to-back years. So it's good time to be a Panther fan. So that's the summary. It's a good time to be a Panther fan.
Yeah, and hey, and if the situation does come where someone like Tomas Nosek, because the money is able to work for them, thankfully the Panthers do have 2 guys who are waivers exempt for the Panthers to at least send them down and at least give them an opportunity to call them back up once game 1 of the playoffs, because there's no roster limit as far as total roster. That it's not illegal to do that as far as the postseason. It just has to come to the game day roster, which they could still practice with the team if you want to do it that way, which doesn't give me the indication that Alexander Barkov will be back to the regular season, because any trade or waivers that would happen after the trade deadline, they would be ineligible to play for the team that would claim them or trade for them. So that's kind of where I think that the Panthers would have to do some of that work prior to. And also, for what it's worth, Mackie Samoskevich, he won't be. He's still 27 games played away from being waiver eligible. There, he's played 133 out of a possible 160. As far as just look that up on Puckpedia. So there's maybe a temporary move to send him down, if anything, and then possibly to bring him back up a little later if the numbers do work that way. And numbers might not be the best for him, but for him, that he's still at least getting up there in the hits and at least learning to play a defensive style of game. So I don't want to get married to his specific numbers as far as that part of the regression of his game for him. But David, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. I know you got an appointment to go to here, but tell everybody where they can find you online, my friend.
Yeah, no worries, brother. You can find me on thehockeynews.com/Panthers. All the Panthers stuff I post goes there. Find me on X and Instagram at David Dwork, and on the hockey show that I host with Roy Bellamy every week on the Dan Le Batard Show Network. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. We have our own YouTube channel, and Roy and I will be up in Tampa, heading up there later today for the Stadium Series. So check out our socials, as we'll have a lot of fun stuff from the weekend up there.
Oh, and it's going to be cold, baby. A high of 44 degrees for that. So they planned this so well. So you guys have a load of fun. And my friend, I'll see you again very soon.
Be good, brother.
Today's episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. And let's be real, managing your finances can feel overwhelming between subscriptions you forgot about, bills that keep piling up, and trying to figure out where all your money actually goes each month. It's easy to feel like you're losing control, and who has the time every transaction to hunt down hidden fees? That's where Rocket Money comes in, the personal finance app that helps you take control, finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, and monitor your spending, and helps you lower the bills so that you can grow your saving. I love how it tracks all my subscriptions and lets me cancel them right in the app in just a few taps. No more hunting down customer service numbers. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/locked-on. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on. rocketmoney.com/locked-on. Third and final segment here on this Thursday, January 29th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. Once again, I'd like to thank David Dwork for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. As right now, the Panthers do have a road game to play tonight in St. Louis, and they're looking to at least extend their winning streak in St. Louis to 3 games. And for St. Louis, it's been just so many ups and downs for them this year, as even before the season for them when it started, I was just thinking, okay, Jim Montgomery is in the second year of him being back there, and it's a little bit of a change in the direction for them as far as just trying to turn over their defense over the last few seasons. But there's a few players on their team who are possibly on the trade block. One of them being Justin Falk, who plays on the right side of the defense, and then also some guys like possibly a Robert Thomas or Jordan Kyrou, who Robert Thomas is an outstanding playmaker for the St. Louis Blues. Jordan Kyrou is a nice little speedster there, but just like the Florida Panthers, they're dealing with a whole bunch of injuries themselves, as Robert Thomas is currently on injured reserve. Jordan Kyrou is currently day-to-day, so the Panthers may have the health advantage going into this one. And also for the St. Louis Blues, 2-7-1 in their last 10, but Kyrou is day-to-day after leaving Tuesday night's game in Dallas. So TBD on if he's going to end up playing on Thursday night against the Florida Panthers, which morning skate for the Blues is going to be at 11 a.m. Local Eastern Standard Time, while the Panthers will hit the ice at 12:30. So just for this St. Louis Blues team, possibly some of the worst goaltending that we've seen in the entire NHL. I mean, we've spoken about Montreal's situation, even Edmonton right before making the trade for Tristan Jarry. Jordan Binnington has although he is in with the Canadian national team for the Olympics, he hasn't necessarily performed well. And are they going to go in the direction of moving on from him? And also, when it comes to this game and comparing it to the last time these two teams played, let's put a little bit of context about where the Panthers were then versus where they are right now for them. Where when they played at home back in December, the Panthers were coming off that emotional comeback win against the Carolina Hurricanes, where the Panthers getting 3 goals in under 10 minutes, down 3-0. But that was the one where the Panthers were pressing and pushing and getting a whole bunch of scoring chances on Brandon Bussey. And then the very next night, it was just so much of a letdown. And then really the levee broke for the Panthers really towards the end of the first period, and it really continued on as the St. Louis Blues found a way to win that game and scored 6 goals on the Panthers. So there's a little bit of context here. So the difference between that is that the Panthers didn't have 48 hours to just emotionally come down from that comeback then in December. But for the Panthers here, they're coming off of a loss that you wish that the Panthers could have found a way to win against the Utah Mammoth. Yeah, they were without some players as well, but again, the Panthers, as far as controlling play, did what they needed to do throughout the night. So that's for the Panthers. You hope that with the injuries that St. Louis is going through, with the fact that it's that, as David mentioned in segment number 2, that they've gotten their game right on the road, and actually it's the record is starting to show as far as the Panthers tilting that the power play has become a lot better on the road, despite it being Uvis Balinskis running it as opposed to Seth Jones. Unfortunately, it was a little bit of a disaster for the Panthers in their most recent game against Utah. And again, it's a continuous stretch of Western Conference teams that they're going to be playing that ends really on Saturday when they take on the Winnipeg Jets. But as far as the numbers for St. Louis, still towards the bottom third in both special teams categories. There was a point where their PDO was not great because they were still suppressing a lot of shots, but giving up at least 4 goals or more a game. So, and the fact that they don't have a lot of the offensive scoring to at least make up for the scoring. And also another player that could be on the trade block, as far as one player who was kind of rumored to be traded last year, Braden Shen. There was also the rumor of him not waiving his no move clause to go to Toronto. He would only go there if his brother Luke Shen also goes there as well. So this is in a little bit of a team in a transition period, as well as the Panthers look. They've played well in a place like this as of late, which Matthew Tkachuk had a natural hat trick in 2 years ago, playing in his hometown. Luke Kunin is also playing in his hometown as well. So I would assume that he would be in the lineup for tonight's game in St. Louis as well. But the St. Louis Blues are bottom of the NHL in goals for, although they got 6 in the last matchup that these two teams faced. And also, again, they don't have the scoring to complement them. Colton Parayko is getting a little older as far as the speed there. So you wonder if the spirits of this team is down as far as that. And I would love for the Panthers in the offseason to hopefully try to get a Robert Thomas if they could at least fit him in for their books. Again, Artemi Panarin, as David and I mentioned, is not going to work for the Panthers this season. Maybe in the offseason if they do clear some cap as well. So that would be the addition for the Panthers. But I would also not be opposed to Robert Thomas, as well as this year and next year for St. Louis is likely not going to be years that they are going to be contending for the Stanley Cup. And for St. Louis, they don't have a whole bunch of draft capital at their disposal. No second round pick, no second round pick in 26, no second round pick in 27, no third round pick in 28. So they've been kind of they've been buying over the last few years, and it hasn't resulted in the winning for them. So you just hope that they could find if you're a St. Louis Blues fan, you're just hoping that they could at least restack the asset farm and open up a little bit of cap space there. So that's really where the St. Louis Blues are. They're kind of in a little bit of purgatory as of right now. I mentioned Binnington hasn't played well this season, but he also has a year left on his deal. So what do they do with him? Do they at least give Joel Hofer the reins in net? Because there have been stretches of time, and Joel Hofer is actually 7 years younger as well than Jordan Binnington, and he's going to be an RFA coming in 27. So do they get that? Do they get it out a year in advance? And again, with I know he's a little bit of a hothead, but the fact that Binnington is 32, do the Panthers want to go in that direction of possibly trading for a guy like him who has a proven track record of playing well in big games, although there have been times where he's been played poorly as well. So that's another thing that every team has to consider, not just the Florida Panthers. But I wouldn't be surprised if they don't end up with him, because I have no reason to believe that Sergei Bobrovsky won't want to come back, and that although he's going to take a massive discount from the contract that he currently has, that he's gonna go somewhere else or even retire. So that might not be an option for the Florida Panthers come the 2026 offseason. So for the Panthers, it's an opportunity to take advantage of a team that's really that's had a frustrating season, and for them continuing to at least keep pace with the Boston Bruins. There, the Bruins are after tonight's game at home against the Philadelphia Flyers, which the Sabres, Canadiens, and Bruins all have the toughest schedules in the entire NHL at 27th, 28th, and 29th, while the Panthers are 12th easiest schedule. And the Bruins are starting to make their Florida trip after their game at home against the Philadelphia Flyers, who are on the second end of a back-to-back as well. So even if the Bruins end up winning, it's a tough stretch for them prior to the Olympic break, and it's starting with the Stadium Series on Sunday night at Raymond James Stadium, which I'm very excited to watch as well. So so we'll see. But the Panthers need to do their fair share of work prior to next Wednesday's game, because that is going to be a big one. Also, they got to take care of business against Buffalo. I feel that one of these games, it's not going to be 2 consecutive starts, or in this case 3 for Sergei Bobrovsky here on Thursday and Saturday, as it's a late afternoon game. So we don't know whether it's going to be Daniil Tarasov tonight in St. Louis or Daniil Tarasov on Saturday afternoon against the Winnipeg Jets. But don't be surprised if these starts are split between the two goaltenders here, as the coaching staff for the Panthers will give Sergei Bobrovsky some rest, and also the fact that they have one more back-to-back prior to the Olympic break. But that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. On Friday's edition, we are going to recap Thursday night's game between the Florida Panthers and the St. Louis Blues, and we're hoping to be recapping a third straight win in St. Louis. So thank you guys, as always, for listening. And in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone, and Steel Roaded, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez, signing off. And you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day.